Just a quick little thing we wanted to mention before the BTCC review is that we will be doing a interview with Sam Bird, the Formula E driver, on Wednesday. This Wednesday coming out, obviously, when the video is going out this week. So if you guys are interested in asking Sam a question, either leave it in the comments of this video or tweet at #AskSamMC. Hopefully, you should be able to find a couple of tweets about that already. But yeah, here we are then today for the Brands Hatch review for the BTCC. I'm obviously joined once again by Matt. Obviously, you guys already know who he is, and obviously everyone's Twitter links will be left down in the description. But obviously at the Brands Hatch Indy, if I can actually get the right name, we'll start off with a little bit of talk about qualifying. And obviously it was a very, very odd grid, I think it's safe to say. Obviously we saw Jeff Smith on pole. What do you think about that then, obviously, before we get into the race?
I think it's safe to say absolutely no one was expecting it, including Jeff Smith himself. But it's just one of those things of right place, right time. Of course, if you take a look at his qualifying lap, I think he was behind one of the US Hondas. I can't remember if it was Neil or Shedden, but he was following them for the entire lap, so he got a nice little... But it's not only the draft, it's also the track knowledge you learn from following a really good driver. So I think you'll be happy with that, but obviously it didn't really translate into a great result in the race, did it really?
Yeah, and talking about the race, we will start getting into that. And there was even news before the race. Obviously, we've both been bigging up West Surrey Racing in the season preview, and they were already talking before the race that with this new BMW engine, they weren't even sure if they'd be able to make it to the end of the day. But obviously, starting up on the grid, and straight away in true BTCC fashion, we saw controversy. As we saw, we did see, if I have a look quickly, we saw Matt Neal and Colin Turkington have a crash straight away. And obviously, what do we make about that then, Matt? What's your opinions? Who's to blame?
It's a bit of a difficult one to put blame on anyone. I guess if you're going to put blame on someone, it's Matt Neal, but it's more to do with the different starting speeds of the cars. Obviously, the BMWs are superb off the line, and I can't really blame Matt Neal for covering the line, but Turkington was already kind of in the gap. But I mean, it wasn't like he did it on purpose. It's just he went to cover the line straight from the start, and Turkington went for the gap, and the gap just closed.
Those BMWs, obviously the big news all day was how quick they were off the line, which I think obviously everyone was expecting. But some of the advantages they managed to make, obviously, in the further races. But another driver that we should mention, obviously, was Tom Ingram, managed to get the lead right at the very start as well, which also was quite surprising. Obviously, we saw 3 Hondas in the top 4 there, so it was obviously very interesting to see Tom Ingram able to get the jump on Jeff Smith right away there. But obviously, we saw, after obviously the race was safety car, then that obviously leads to sort of a less dramatic restart of the race. And I think the next thing, obviously, we should talk about was, unfortunately, Dave Newsham with his Audi. The wheel just decided it didn't really want to be part of the car anymore. What do we think for that, for poor Dave?
Well, he didn't exactly have a straightforward day, did he? He is a former race winner, and it's kind of it's a bit saddening to see that he's not that the car let him down in that situation, but it's just one of those things, and there'll be times in the future where the car will let him down again, but it's the same for every driver really. Sometimes you just can't control these things, and if it's just something like a loose wheel nut, it's kind of luck of the draw really. But yeah, I guess he'll just move on for the next round, and I'm sure we'll see him there or thereabouts in a race 3 sometime during the season.
Definitely. Now I think the next thing really we should mention, obviously we spoke about how Jeff Smith had such a brilliant qualifying session there, obviously massively shocked with his pole position, and it's safe to say that will definitely be the highlight of his weekend. Obviously we saw him lose that place to Tom Ingram right at the very start, and then sort of 15-20 laps in we did see him lose a whole heap of positions, and then unfortunately end up having to retire in the pit lane due to what I think was a wheel nut issue as well. They were saying all weekend that Honda was having issues with the wheel mechanisms, which unfortunately I think he was saying one of his teammates had the same issue in qualifying, and obviously he ended up having the issue where it mattered most in the race. So obviously what do you make of that then? Do you think obviously that will have to be something they focus on to improve for the next race at Donington?
Well, it's not that big of an issue for the wheel nuts. It's more, I mean, if it is just the mechanisms failed on it, they'll obviously go to the wheel nut providers that they have and basically just give them a lot of nasty words and say fix this problem. There's not really much more they can do, to be honest. They just have to hope that Donington improves and that they don't have the same problem again. Obviously, we don't really know what the cause of the wheel nut problem was, whether it's been put on too tightly and it's kind of broke the nut, or whether it's just not been put on tight enough, or whether, you know, something's just warped, or, you know, it could be any kind of list of things. So they'll of course be looking into it, and I'm sure they'll have something sorted by the next race.
Definitely. And I think obviously the only other real sort of major thing we saw obviously throughout the race was Dan Lloyd, unfortunately, there retiring right at the very end of the race there. So obviously very, very unfortunate for him. But I think if we have a look through the top 10 there at the end of race 1, obviously Tom Ingram in that Toyota, obviously he sounded so ill throughout that whole race weekend. It was horrible the amount of questions they were asking him during the races. But he obviously did end up winning the race by just over 3 seconds, with Gordon Shedden in a very, very solid P2 after actually setting the fastest lap. Gordon Shedden, albeit only just over Tom Ingram, but obviously with Brands Hatch Indy being such a short circuit there. And we also saw at the end of that race even Adam Morgan massively closing in on Jordan Shedden. Now, what did you make of that? Do you think if he was given one more lap, he could have got the position?
It's that classic scenario, isn't it, where if the race was just one lap longer, catching's one thing, but passing is another, and Gordon Shedden is a wily old fox at this BTCC game, so it would have been difficult for Morgan to pass him. Could he have passed him? Probably. There's a good chance, but it's well, we've seen Morgan before. He's a bit feisty when it comes to overtaking at times, so who knows? If it was one lap longer, possibly.
And next up, obviously, we saw Jack Goff, obviously having in the timing sheets what looked to be quite a lonely race in the end. And then, obviously, if you have a look behind him, it turned very much into a train behind him, as we saw Rob Austin up in P5 there with that Toyota Avensis. Then we saw Andrew Jordan and Rob Carlard both in their BMWs. They're very, very close behind him with Matt Jackson. And Michael Epps, that was another driver I wanted to talk about. He has obviously made such big strides since last season. What did you make of that in race 1?
I was impressed, because obviously you haven't really seen Michael Epps pull out a result like that ever in his BTCC career. I think that was his best result in his career. So I mean, for him to get in the top 10, I don't know whether it speaks more about himself or more about the car now, because he's finally got himself in a competitive outfit with that Volkswagen CC, obviously championship winning car from 2015, I think. Maybe not. Championship contender, at least. I can't remember that far back. My memory plagues me at the worst of times. But we'll have to see. Obviously, racing for Team Hardy, who've finally got themselves a competitive car after years of running Golfs and an Audi and whatever, just not really being anywhere near the front. I think that both the team and driver can be extremely happy with that result.
And obviously the final driver in that top 10 was obviously Tom Chilton on his return. You know, what do we think? Obviously that's as well as he planned for the race to go, or do you think he could have got more at the car?
It's a difficult... it's a brand new car, the Vauxhall Astra. I thought before the race that it was based on the Opel Astra TC, but apparently it's not. It's built by PowerMax Racing, so a small team building a car by themselves that's a lot of work, and obviously a lot of budget's gone into that, but if it pays off over the season, it pays off. Obviously a top 10 may not seem like a brilliant result for looking at a driver like Tom Chilton, who's competed in the WTCC, but I think with that being a new car and with it being a small team, I think they can be very pleased with that result.
So that was the rundown then of the top 10. Now let's move on then into race 2. And well, we started with race 2, and then we didn't start with race 2, and then we started with race 2 all over again. Now obviously, if we run through there, obviously we had the 2 formation laps, and then obviously at the start of these 2 formation laps, we saw Tom Ingram not really start. Now obviously the team were talking about car issues on that lap, and there was really uncertainty about whether he'd have to just go into the pit lane or not. And then we heard news that he would have to start from the back and then started at the front. What do we all make of that? Do you think there could have been far more knowledge to be put out about what he was actually meant to be doing? Because it kind of seemed like guesswork, in all honesty, by everyone on the pit wall.
Yeah, it didn't really seem like anyone knew what was going on. Obviously, because he was responsible for the false start, he should have went into the pits. He didn't. But then you maybe think that, did the team do that on purpose, thinking that a drive-through penalty is a lesser penalty than starting at the back? I don't think so, but obviously they decided, yes, that's the case, or maybe just forgot that was the case. So then we, of course, went into the second race start, which, I'll let you go through that, because that in itself is another...
Yeah, well, we talk about the second race start, and obviously we saw, I think, what is probably the biggest crash of the day, obviously, right at the very start, with Brands Hatch being such a thin start line. We saw our second casualty of Jason Plato, and obviously that was a pretty big hit, obviously straight into the concrete barrier. What do we make of that then? Who do we think is to blame?
Well, it was a similar situation to the Colin Turkington crash. Obviously, the Subarus are rear-wheel drive and get amazing launches like the BMWs. Just another situation of going for a closing gap and there being another accident.
Which obviously meant after we saw the red flag from, obviously, this first lap crash, obviously massive collision for Jason Plato. Luckily, obviously, he was alright. The race was then red flagged, which actually meant that Tom Ingram was then not having to obviously do his drive-through penalty and not having to start from the back, because not one racing lap had been completed there. So obviously that really saved him. Obviously, if he had decided to start from the back originally, obviously that would have meant he would have had to stay there. But obviously very, very lucky for him in that second race start. So we don't know what was going on there. But then if we have a look further on, obviously into the race after it was red flagged and then restarted, obviously we saw Tom Ingram. Potentially it was they were speaking that he might not be able to actually get the car off the line very well, as where Jason Plato had crashed it, obviously had to put a lot of sand down, but obviously there wasn't too much to say about that, and obviously all that worrying in the end was really for nothing, because the car really just didn't start, did it? In obviously the second time.
Well, I think the problem, what was the problem with it? With clutch or electrics, I can't remember. It was one of the two. We obviously saw him trying to do the full reset on the first race start, but second race start, I think could have been worse, really. Considering all the considering everything that could have happened with that, he's just extremely lucky to have started where he did, if I'm honest.
And then obviously we saw Ash Sutton and also in the gravel at turn 1 there. Obviously, what do we make of that? 2 Subarus out of the race really before it even began. Obviously, they just could not get any luck there, could they?
No, and Ash Sutton himself had an absolutely rotten first 2 races by that point. Well, obviously the second race going to the gravel. So Subaru themselves not really having an opportunity to kind of prove themselves, which kind of leaves them still as an unknown coming into the third race. And obviously Plato, with the damage, was unable to go into the third race, as we'll probably talk about in a little bit. Sutton, I don't know. I think it's just one of those things with touring cars where you've got too many cars on too little of a track. It's part of the appeal, and it comes with the challenges of being squeezed out onto the gravel. And
then, obviously, towards the end of the race, obviously they managed to get that Subaru back out. And then, obviously, we saw he then ended up in another crash with Aidan Moffat on lap 18 of the race there. So, obviously, very, very unfortunate for him. But, obviously, that race, probably the most carnage strewn throughout the lot there, in all fairness. But, obviously, with everyone, obviously, frantically trying to get into the top 10 in that race. Obviously, you know, everyone's obviously trying to make up as many positions as they possibly could. And the final thing that we did see there was actually Rob Austin ended up getting disqualified for overtaking and making contact with another car. It was it Alex Jordan?
Andrew Jordan, yeah.
Andrew Jordan, sorry, yeah, that's Andrew Jordan there. Can never get the names right. Under the yellow flags. So obviously he was disqualified from that race. And then obviously we move into the race results. So as you can see, Gordon Shedden did in fact win that race with that Honda there. So very, very happy for him to take home the race win, with Rob Collard up in P2, obviously with that lightning start with the BMWs there. So he could be obviously very, very happy with that as well. Tom Ingram up in P3 with Adam Morgan in the Mercedes. They're up in P4 there. Obviously we saw him, Matt Jackson and Andrew Jordan having quite a titanic battle towards the end of the race there. What do you make of that?
It was brilliant. It's classic BTCC of having three cars within about a second of each other and just absolute front end to rear end the whole way around the track. Obviously with Brands Hatch you get a lot of that with it being quite a short lap, and there not really being, well, there's probably only about 2 designated overtaking areas on the whole track, so you do get a lot of this bunching up. I thought it was just brilliant.
And then obviously if we look further down the grid, further down the top 10, we also saw Josh Cook managing to defend from Tom Chilton right at the very end there, and also Colin Turkington I think should be one driver we speak about, because obviously after retiring in that first race he did manage to get the car up into the top 10 there, obviously meaning that he would be there ready for the random grid, and he also set the fastest lap of the race there, which, having a look down, Rob Collard seemed to be the only other person in the top 10 that could really get within sort of 2-3 tenths of that time. And then obviously we have a look right down at the very bottom there. We saw Michael Epps once again showing that he was very, very strong in that Volkswagen down in P10. They're also obviously making it onto the random grid. We saw him quite feisty obviously in that second race. So I think once again it's fair to say it was really good to see him in such a strong position there and really having a lot more confidence in the car, obviously in his second season in the series. But let's move on then into race 3, and obviously we saw Tom Chilton on pole in that Vauxhall Astra there, and obviously he had, I think, 2 of the BMWs are very close behind him, obviously with those rear-wheel drives, and it was no surprise that obviously we saw the BMWs jump him very, very early on we saw Andrew Jordan even jump him very, very early on in that race, but obviously we'll move on into Colin Turkington a bit later on. But obviously, were you surprised that we saw Andrew Jordan get past right at the very start?
No. Yeah, that car is just lightning off the line this year for whatever reason. I remember that was it last year or the year before they tried to kind of nerf the BMW and the rear-wheel drive car starts in general, and it did work. But this year they've seemed to have just gone into another level because they are so much quicker off the line this year. Obviously, Jordan jumping 2 positions to get into the lead, pretty much ideal, and was able to kind of run away with it in effect.
Other obviously incidents we saw on lap 1, unfortunately we saw Matt Jackson in the gravel on lap 1, as well as Matt Simpson and James Cole also had a crash on lap 1 there, and obviously there wasn't really, obviously you've got the general action and obviously the bumper to bumper contact, but I think the next thing really to talk about in race 3 was obviously Rob Collard obviously letting Turkington through on lap 10. Were you surprised by that, do we think, or do you think that was very much just sort of a 1-2 driver sort of order there?
I was a bit surprised because usually you see, well, we've seen in the past that Collard and Turkington tend to like to have a little bit of a battle. But it was low down-ish, and well, no, it was about, were they in 4th and 5th at the time, something around that. So I was a bit surprised that he let him through with such ease. But maybe it's new. Obviously, I heard in the commentary that apparently they've got a new kind of rule of conduct between the drivers. And Turkin, in fairness, was way faster than Collard, was carrying basically no ballast. So I think, I'm surprised, but I can understand why he was let past.
And talking about obviously Turkington's incredible pace, he managed to make big strides on the top 2 during the second half of the race and managed to get up into P2, taking that off Tom Chilton there on lap 17, and that obviously meant he was in pursuit of Andrew Jordan there. Obviously he'd been able to make himself, a couple of second gap over Tom Chilton there, and when he saw Turkington obviously had got up into P2, he really tried to make a run for it, and obviously it nearly worked for him, but coming into the final few laps of the race, Turkington was right in his gearbox. And let's just say then, sort of lap 21, what were you expecting to happen in those final couple of laps? Were you expecting to see Turkington get through, or did you think, like we saw, that Jordan was able to hold on to the lead?
I was expecting Turkington to get through, but I guess part of me, you forget that Jordan is a champion in the BTCC, and he is a very, very capable driver. But I just thought, perhaps a little bit naively, that Jordan's still getting used to the car, obviously. First weekend race out in it. Maybe Turkett would be able to find a flaw somewhere in Jordan's defences, but I was pleasantly surprised with seeing Jordan being able to hold him off, and that's gonna give him a lot of confidence for the rest of the season, I think.
Yeah, obviously we saw both drivers there really wanted to try and make a point to prove, as they were saying on the commentary. Obviously Colin Turkington wanted to win for West Surrey Racing once again, but Andrew Jordan wanted to prove, that he wasn't just a front-wheel drive specialist as well. And in the end, obviously, we almost saw it go to tears right at the very end of the races. We saw Turkington try to get at the inside of Andrew Jordan on the final lap, but fortunately for Andrew Jordan, although he was nearly spanned sideways, he was able to hold on to the win there by just 0.3 of a second over Turkington in that final race. But really, you say for Turkington, after obviously crashing out right at the very start of race one, he cannot complain with P2 in the final race of the day.
Very much a saved weekend from there, being able to get some decent points, considering the start of the weekend he had. So if I was Turkington, I'd be very happy. And obviously it's championship not lost in this situation. I mean, with it being the first round, you can never say it is championship lost, but he's not a million miles away.
Definitely. And if we have a look through the rest of the top 10, obviously we saw Andrew Jordan take home his first win for BMW there in race 3, but Colin Turkington, as we said, in second. Tom Chilton there, obviously once Turkington got through, kind of backed off the pace there. It was looking in the early stages that he could potentially win the race, but unfortunately for him, he just didn't have the pace right near the very end. Obviously with the front wheel drives, the tyre wear just obviously degrades so much worse. Obviously the other cars, like the BMWs and such, like the tyre wear is far more evenly spread towards the end of the race, which makes the cars more stable. But Matt Neal there in a very, very solid P4 as well in the very end. Obviously after just missing out on that top 10, obviously the top 10 random grid. But having a look further down as well, you got Adam Morgan there who was able to hold off from Rob Collard and Gordon Shedden after it was looking, as well as Jack Goff, Michael Epps, that it could get quite feisty in the very end there, but it sort of all calmed down as we came onto the final couple of laps. But Michael Epps there, as I said, once again, 3 top 10 finishes there. Obviously, we don't want to carry on talking about how well he did, but obviously a very, very solid weekend out for himself. And then Jake Hill in the other Volkswagen there, managing to get a top 10 finish as well. But obviously, if we have a look overall at the points level, obviously we've got Gordon Shedden leading with Tom Ingram up in second place. So with Andrew Jordan third and Adam Morgan, and we've got Colin Turkington there after a very, very good final race up in 7th place there. Who do you really think then was, shall we say, the strongest driver of the race weekend, or should we say who really showed that they have got the pace to be winning the next few races? Who would you put after that first race then, I think, in the simple answer, as your world champion by the end of the season?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Obviously, you can look to Gordon Shedden and say he got the most solid results. You can look at Tom Ingram and say he had the best. He got the win with none of the cars having any ballast, so his car would have the best pace in theory. You could look at Turkington and say, okay, after having a terrible first race, the way he recovered showed a champion's drive. You could also look at, Andrew Jordan and say, to be able to win in your first weekend in a rear-wheel drive car, that's a complete champion's performance. You could look at Rob Collard. You could look at pretty much anyone who finished anywhere in the top 5 or top 10 and say they have got a decent chance. Personally, I'm going to... I
think, there's a lot of very, very strong drivers there, definitely, and all really having attributes by themselves that really prove themselves as very strong drivers in that first race weekend. But carry on, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to just answer your question more directly. Just personally, I feel like at the moment I would go with Gordon Shedden as things stand.
Consistency with his, obviously, there was no really, obviously, outstanding drivers, although obviously we did see him get P2 in race 1 and race 2 there, which I think consistency is everyone... Sorry, he did win, race 2, but obviously consistency will be key, as everyone always says in the BTCC. But is there any other points then you wanted to talk about before we end off the podcast?
Just kind of the difference in pace from last year. Obviously, we came into, well, especially the season preview, thinking that West Surrey Racing were going to walk it, and I'm happy to say we've been proven wrong. It's looking like it's going to be a much closer season than we both anticipated.
So I think then that will do us then for the Brands Hatch BTCC podcast review there from this first race weekend of the season. Obviously, Donington Park will be on the 15th and 16th of April, and hopefully we will be able to get the video out before sort of the Wednesday after the 3 races there. But obviously, don't forget to leave your opinions from the first race weekend of the season, guys. I've been your host, Matt, and we will see you next time.